All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Lara Braid. I'm one of the college success coaches. Thank you for joining us for an Elders Experience Zoom session. Today we have Lark Real Bird with us, so I will let Lark introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. As Lara said, I'm Lark Real Bird, and I'm from the Crow Reservation in Montana. So,
All
yeah.
right. Thank you so much, Lark. I'll just jump right into it and just start asking questions. But if any of
Okay.
our viewers have questions, feel free to put them in the group chat and then I can ask them. Or if you want to come off of speaker, that's fine too. Cool. All right. So where are you from originally?
I am originally from the Crow Indian Reservation. I was born in Billings, Montana, but grew up on the reservation and then moved away to go to college, and then just kind of moved to a different state and returned after being gone for about 15 years, and then just resided here again back
Nice.
on my reservation.
Yeah. Um, so we'll start with your education experience. Did you like going to school when you were growing up, or what was that like for you?
Like elementary and high school and that kind of school, or
Yeah, it could
um
be elementary and high school
yeah,
and stuff.
well, I think with elementary school it was like we had to go, and it was something we all did, so I can't really say if I liked it or not. It was just something we had to do as kids, so I went and didn't complain much. And then high school was a little bit different. I really didn't like it either. But again, we had to go, so we did. However, college was a little bit different. College was, again, I had to go, but it was a different, I was kind of had a little bit more freedom than I did in high school. And so I enjoyed it. But the thing was about college is I had too much freedom, and then I didn't do very well.
So where did you go to school for college?
I started out going for a certificate program. Wanted to work in the travel industry. So I started out registering for this program called Travel and Airlines over in Rapid City, and I lasted just one academic year. Um, I don't know. It just I college life was different, and then being away from home, even though it was 4 maybe 5 hours away from home, it seemed really far. So I just really didn't do very well, even though I did like that program. And so I after that academic year, I came home, and then I registered to go to Montana State University in Bozeman, which is 3 hours from home, and there ended up graduating from there.
Would you graduate with?
Oh, I graduated with a degree in graphic design.
Me too. A.
Oh, yeah.
Um, so you kind of talked about like the challenges you faced about like being far from home. How did you kind of deal with that at that time?
I think, um, well, I called home a lot, but one of the first times when I went to Rapid City, and about 2 weeks into being there, I got really, really lonesome. And so it was a Sunday evening, and I called home. And as soon as I heard my grandmother's voice, I just cried. And she didn't say anything, and she just let me cry till I was done. And then her first thing she said was, "I'll come after you tomorrow morning." So then I was like, no, I'll be okay. I'll be all right. So I stayed, and I finished out the semester, as well as went back for spring, and then finished that, and then came home.
Oh,
So, but
wow.
she made it really easy to come after me, made it really easy for me to go home if I needed to.
So having that support from back home was really helpful for you
Yeah.
then. That's
Hmm.
good. Um, is there anything that you would change about your educational journey so far?
Oh yeah, I would. I really would. I would have maybe did better in high school as far as writing English subjects, and just been more focused and more serious about it, because once I got to college, I had to do classes that I should have already did in high school. And so that kind of put me behind. And then, of course, not really knowing what I wanted to do at first also kind of took a while for me to figure out. And I didn't really, I just stayed in general studies as long as I could. And then I was kind of pressured to find a major. And so, a lot of people here end up going into education. And so I kind of did that, but I didn't like it at first. So I had to take some time off and come home, stay home for a year and figure it out. And then when I went back, I decided to go into graphic design. And once I figured out that that's what I wanted to do, I finished my program within a couple years. So I think one of the important things as new students going into college is to kind of have an idea what you want and what you want, not having other people decide for you what you want to be. And I think what happened with me was there was too many people that had their input as to what I should study, and that just didn't work. So what I told my daughter as she was going is, you pick what you want to do. If it was up to me, I'd pick for her, but from my own experience, I that doesn't work. So I just let her pick on her own and supported her in that way.
It's really good. Yeah. Definitely figure out what you want to do before committing
Hmm.
anything.
Yeah.
Is there any like, I don't know, differences or just something that you find interesting that, your daughter went through college that you might not have, or something you went through college that she didn't? Have you noticed any changes or differences in that way?
I think, the differences, as I said, she was more focused than I was. Um, and because I had already experienced college life, I was able to advise her on certain things where me, even though I had older other people in my family go to college, there was really no advice from them. And then my grandmother was, you know, kind of had this old fashioned way of thinking where she didn't get involved. She just said that I had to go to college and that was it. And she never, or nobody asked me what I wanted to do, not even my high school counselor. So I went in there blindly and then just kind of bounced around, um, and just not having that real discipline and responsibility. I felt like I was too young to just be sent out there by myself. So when it was my daughter's turn to go, I really, shared with her my experiences. And then the advice that I had given her is once she decided on a major, to follow her program and not to drop classes, not to take classes that didn't pertain to her area of study. And my thing for her was I wanted her to get done within a 4-year period so that she can find her work and get on with her life, which was something I wanted to do and it didn't really happen. So I guess that's the main difference too, is, I had experienced these things. So now I was trying to make sure that she didn't, and she had a better, more positive experience.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so what was like something that was your absolute favorite thing about school? And that could be from elementary school up to college, or I know you're a teacher now, so is there anything that you enjoy the most about education?
I think what I did enjoy the most is when I did go to grad school. Um, so I went to grad school after my kids got here, and I had a family, and I went to grad school, and I was like, you know what? now this is something that I wanted to do. It wasn't somebody saying I had to go. And so this was something that I decided to do. And to me, I wanted to prove to myself that I could be a good student and that I could get good grades and that I could do this. And so that was my favorite part because now I'm an adult, responsible now. And so, man, I got myself on the schedule. I stuck with it. And to me, to be able to do that and finish that program was my favorite part. And to just be able to stick with a schedule. I didn't, waste time. I wrote down everything. I always use an agenda. I always have, but there, the I every half hour was I wrote down what I needed to do, and even when I was going to take my break, so I would schedule in this 30-minute break. And in that 30 minutes, I ran around. If I was studying at home, I ran around and did laundry. I ran around and did whatever I needed to do in the house. But then in that time, in that 2 years that I was in grad school, I also, that was the time that I did the most beadwork and the most sewing I ever did. Why? Because I scheduled it all in. And so let's say I scheduled in beading time for 30 minutes and I would set my timer, and man, I would hustle and I get to work. And as soon as that bell went off, I put it away and get back to my studies. So that to me, having a schedule and following it is also one of the things that is going to make you successful. Because now I teach at a tribal college, and man, my students, they really frustrate me because they don't do this time thing right. They have constantly write me and say, well, I can't go because my kids are doing this or this and that. There's always some reason not to come to class. And so that really bothers me. It's like I want them to make that commitment, because this is a big commitment. And so, but as a young student, I was not a very good student either, but it took me to have my family, to have a home. We lived on campus, so I needed to make sure everything was scheduled. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't have made it. So, just the whole grad school experience is my favorite because now I knew I could be a good student.
No, that's awesome. And we also have a lot of students here with the College Fund who are, first-time parents, or they're going back to school later in life, or they're starting their graduate degree. And very similar to you, they have their family, they have their work, they have other stuff they want to do. But I think it's great to hear that what you did for yourself and how impactful it was for you. Hopefully, some other students will be able to hear this and take away that same idea.
Mhm.
Um, Is there any advice you would give to students who are going into a graduate program?
Yeah, just schedule everything in, schedule your break times, and stick to it. The first time we moved to Bozeman, I didn't work. My husband, he he worked, and I knew how tough it was to go to school as a single person. So I knew that going to college with a family was going to be a little bit more difficult. So he opted to work, which he always did, and then I didn't have a job. So going to school was my full-time job, if in that sense. And so it was really interesting because we moved from Hardin, Montana to Bozeman, and probably about the first week of school, uh, I got all my books, went to a class, and started reading these books that I was supposed to read. And oh my gosh, I didn't understand it. And everybody's using computers instead of, you know, like if you're writing. I remember when I used to have to write a paper, I would write it, actually handwrite it in a notebook, and then I transfer it. Um, I would type it on a typewriter. So now I notice everybody was just doing all their initial work on a laptop. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so interesting. But anyhow, so I got all my stuff, and I was ready. And I read this chapter, and it just went over my head. I just didn't know what it was talking about. And I went upstairs and I talked to my husband and I said, man, I said, you know what? I'm not understanding this. I said, read it and see what you think. And he read it and he said he didn't know it either. So then I was like, I said, I don't think this is for me. And then he looked at me and he said, you better not quit. He said, it cost me $1,800 to move you up here. And he said, I had to haul all your Indian clothes up these steps. So then I'm like, oh my God, okay. So I go back downstairs, and the only other thing that I could do was refer back to my cultural beliefs. And so I had a bag of cedar, and I burned my cedar, and I got it all smoky in my apartment. And then I cedered my book, that book that I couldn't understand. I cedered my notebooks, my pens, my pencils, even my computer, my backpack, everything. And I said this prayer, and then I just went for it. So after that, I truly believe that, going back to my cultural ways, that really helped.
No, that's awesome. Can you speak a little bit more about that? Like the times in your life that you've struggled and you've gone back to your culture to like ground you. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I will. Um, the first time, I always call it round one, round two, and so the first round of being in college was when I was a young college student, and just kind of being out there alone. And, I mean, I had other people that came from the same place as me. So we were there, but for the first time, I was alone without being by my grandma and her being there. So anyway, I remember even in, I remember the first few years or any time that I was having any kind of difficulties. She always she always had this song that she would sing. I always remembered it as a little girl playing, and she would sing her song, and she would tell me about where her song originated from and what the purpose of it was. So growing up, anytime her kids were going through something or she was going through something, she would sing that song. So I knew that that song existed. So while I was in college, I would call her and I'd say, Grandma, I said, can you sing your song for me? There's some stuff going on, whatever it may be. And sometimes she would sing it over the phone to me, or she would say, after I hang up, she said, I'll sing for you. And so that really brought a sense of comfort for me, to know that there was something beyond me that was there, to take care of things that I was couldn't handle on my own.
That's really
So
awesome.
with this song, I still I learned it. I learned her song. And so then now my daughter, I would do the same thing for her. And so she would from time to time call me or message me and say, can you sing your song? So I would. So we still continue to use this song.
No, that's really awesome. Um, Thank you for sharing that with us.
Mhm.
Um, we'll kind of move on to the next set of questions, which is about work life and career. What was your first job?
My first job as a teenager, I was in tribal youth, and I just got to answer phones and, it's kind of miscellaneous stuff. And then the next summer after that, I worked up at the Little Bighorn Battlefield bookstore as a sales clerk. And there I really learned a lot, because a lot of those, well, it was a government agency up there. So I learned how to be on time, when you're supposed to take breaks, and if you don't take a break, they expect you to take it. So you've got to take it. So I learned a good work ethic working with the government. and their, how they do their time. So that was good. That was really a good learning experience. And I did that in the summers until I was about 21. Every summer, the lady that was running the bookstore would hire me back. And then coming back from college during the break, she would have me come up and work, for a couple days during the weekend or the week and whatever. So that was good. That was a really good experience. And once I got out of college, my first job out of college was to teach at Little Bighorn College, and they hired me to teach an art class. And then I also taught dancing, our country western dancing. And I also got to teach or facilitate the adult ed program, people getting their GEDs and stuff. So that was my first job. And remember, I teach now, but that wasn't what my major was. And so it was real interesting. I enjoyed it, but then I stayed there for just one academic year, and then I left. I moved to a different state. I had no job. I just left. Again, I was a young person. I had no responsibilities except for myself, and I just wanted to live somewhere else. So I just left. I packed up everything I owned, which in this little car, and I just hit the road. And so after I got to where I was going, I ended up working at this preschool, and I worked there for like 2 years, I think. And how that worked for me was I started out working with these 2-year-olds, and then I got to move up with them. So when they went into the next level, I moved with them, and I moved with them until they were 5, and then I left. And then the next job I had was in another state, which was in Arizona. Then I started working for this magazine. It was called Native Peoples Magazine. And I started out as a receptionist, but within a few months, I was promoted to the art director. And so that was really good because it was a lot more of, what I went to school for. So that worked out really well, and I enjoyed it. And then in the meantime, I got married and had a child. So I took some time off from that job, and then I ended up not going back because I didn't want to leave my new baby with a sitter. And so I decided just to stay home and raise him. So that was a job that I enjoyed. And that was the first time I had to use like computer, doing kind of computer artwork and things like that. So that was a big challenge. But once you get the hang of it, it's fine.
So I know you said that you had gone to school for graphic design, but then you ended up
Mhm.
teaching. Do you have any advice or just anything to say to people who went to school for one degree, but they ended up not doing anything with it? Or if someone's worried about that happening to them, do you have anything that you would say to that?
I think, one of the things is to really research your major and what kind of jobs are out there. And that was something I didn't do. I just sort of, anything I do, I kind of go into it real blindly. And then I'm like, all these crazy stuff go on, but in the end, it ends up being okay. And so, for my advice, and to not to research your major and know what jobs are there, so that you know what you're looking for. And like I said, I started out in education, but then I quit. But then now it's like I do education work anyway. And I just thought to myself, I'm like, oh, if I could, I should have just stayed in that major. But oh well, it's been interesting. And so how I ended up teaching is here in the state of Montana, they have this Indian education for all, and so all the schools are supposed to teach some kind of, or they're supposed to teach Native culture. And so they came up with this certificate, and it's almost equivalent to a teaching degree, but we teach culture and language. And so it's called a Class 7 certification. And each tribe, they come up with their own standards of what they want, what the teacher will teach. And so, and then they come up with their own like tests and stuff for anybody that's interested. So I ended up getting a class 7 certification through my tribe and the state of Montana, which is how I ended up teaching. And I did teach culture and language, and man, I loved it. That was something I really enjoyed. But right now, I'm not teaching. I'm only teaching at the community or tribal college. But with this class 7 certification, as long as the school district has it, or they're supposed to create a classroom for that. So that's, what I've been doing the past, 7, 8 years. And I totally really enjoy it. I enjoy sharing my culture and my knowledge. And then, school kids are elementary. I was working in the elementary, and man, those kids just bring a lot of good vibes, even though there's some with, bad behaviors and stuff, but that kind of those, just the things they say, and they're just kind of so honest, and I just really enjoy it. And they bring, just bring happiness to me when I work with them.
Yeah, you've shared some good stories with me over the time that you've been
Yeah,
working there, that you were
they
working there.
say all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, kids are crazy.
They are.
Um, um, did you ever find yourself deciding to like change your career path completely at some point and then you decided against it, or did you just jump into something new
Well,
or anything like that?
I think, because I was in this graphic design, I thought I had to stay within that. And actually, this teaching thing is totally took me by surprise. And I one time a few years ago, I was interviewed, for the teaching job. And they asked me why I wanted to be a teacher. And I said, actually, this profession chose me because I always end up working with children and starting at the preschool level when I lived in Albuquerque. And then when I came back here, I ended up working at the Boys and Girls Club. And so, and then just kind of this job without really trying to be a teacher, I ended up being. So that's what I meant by the profession chose me. And so I think that's where my career path just sort of, I just kind of let it be, and that's where it took me.
And I'm assuming that you've enjoyed the ride so far.
Yeah, so far I have. And so last school year I didn't teach. I was offered this other job through the tribe to create a curriculum for preschoolers in the Crow language. So I did that, and it was supposed to be a 1 year appointment. And I took that, and I was certain that the school I had been working for was going to hire me back, and they didn't. So now I'm doing something totally different. And it's not really what I want to do. I'm working with the tribal health department right now, and it's not really what I do, but it's flexible enough for me to go back into the school system and do different presentations and different lessons, but it has to do with like opioid awareness, these kind of health issues. But then I kind of incorporate my culture and language within it too. So I'm still doing a little bit of teaching. It's just not how I want to teach.
Oh,
So
I didn't know that.
hopefully,
It's definitely different.
yeah, it really is. So, um, but I want to, just say that whatever major or career you're in, I mean, again, research it and stick with it and don't follow the money. I think that's what I did because I enjoyed the curriculum and I got it done for preschoolers, and it paid a little bit more than my teaching, but then now I couldn't go back to it and I'm like sad. So,
Yeah, it's definitely a bummer,
mhm.
but
And
I'm sure
even
something will pop
today,
up for you.
yeah, I hope so. Today, one of the grandparents of my former students came into that office where I work, and she said, "Oh," she said, how come you're working here?" And I said, "Oh, I just kind of really didn't go into detail." I said, "Yeah," I said, "they Lodge Grass School didn't hire me back." And she said, "Why?" And I said, I don't know. Anyway, she said, she said, "School is where you belong." She said, You don't look right in this atmosphere." I'm working in that office.
Yeah.
That was so I thought, oh well, that's good, and I get a lot of comments from parents, and at first where they said their kids missed me and they enjoyed the work that I did, and even my students would still come and tell me, it's like, where are you, and we're not doing anything in there, and things like that. So um, the students will come and share, and just let me know that they miss me being there. So I appreciate that.
It's really good. Do you have any advice for any younger teachers or first-time teachers who might be struggling with making that connection with students or is worried about that?
Yeah. One of the biggest things for me is classroom management. Make sure you have your classroom management right off the bat, because if you don't, those kids are gonna get away with a lot. And then it's gonna be constant battle, constant struggle. And I see that a lot with teachers, new ones coming in, as well as ones that have been there. And you can tell when there's no classroom management. And so with my classroom management, I set a lot of rules and boundaries. And once those kids learn it, they totally respect it. Like one of the things that I witnessed in other classrooms is like these kids go to the teacher's desk and they'll get things and sit at her desk. Man, I didn't allow that in my classroom at all. And so I would take this duct tape and I put it at the edge of my desk, and I said, "You cannot touch anything on this side of this desk." I said, "This is my workspace." I said, "You guys, this is your area to work. This is mine. So do not touch anything on there." So once they figure it out, they're good. And then I also put this other line where like these shelves were, and they weren't supposed to get anything off those shelves unless they had permission. And then when they were lined up and ready to go, I also put this tape on the floor, and they were supposed to line up on one side of that. So after a while, they police themselves. And if anybody steps over on the other side of that line, they tell each other that, "Hey, you're on the other side. You need to stay on this side," and things like that. And then I had a reading corner where it was good because I had it in a corner and I had a chair, and this really cool rug that I had all these shapes and different colors. And so I would call those kids one by one based on if they were quiet. Um, so then I would call them, one by one, and come to sit at the red circle, but I would all say it in my language. So then they would, if they knew it, they'd come and sit down. If they didn't know it, they'd have to go back, and then somebody else would come, and, things like that. And so I had all these little routines and all these boundaries, and it worked. And then, like when they first come in, I give them 2 minutes to settle down, and they can either, talk and visit, or just sit quietly with their head down. So that was their choice. And once the timer went off, then it was time to be quiet and be ready for the lesson. So, yeah, classroom management is key.
For sure. I can definitely see, especially working with kids, I can definitely see how that's a big component.
Mm-hmm.
Um, can you talk about a little bit about like Crow language revitalization or just the work that you've done with that since you are a fluent speaker yourself? Can you just talk a little bit about your being a fluent speaker, I guess? I don't know what I'm trying to
Yeah.
ask.
Um, Well, as you say, I am a fluent speaker. That was always spoke in my household growing up. All us kids spoke our language, and I lived near my great grandmother, great aunts, and just other relatives. And they were just within walking distance. So I would walk over and we would play. We'd play at the river all day in the summertime and things like that. And so and then it seemed like we didn't go places much. Occasionally we would get to go to Billings, Hardin to grocery shop. And I honestly believe that all Native people spoke their language. Um, and then the first time I went somewhere to a different tribe, I noticed they weren't. And that was really surprising to me. And and then my exposure to the English language was through television because we had a television by then. And then the guy that worked at the post office in the little store, and then going to the IHS clinic or hospital. A lot of the workers were non-native. And then just going to the stores in Hardin and Billings were all white people. So that was my limited exposure. And then just barely knowing what to say. And so one of the little store and post office, we would go there every day to check the mail. And then I was probably about 5, and I think the Head Start was just going on maybe. But anyway, my grandma and I would go, and she'd give me a nickel because I wanted to buy that some bubble gum or whatever they had. And so I didn't know how to say it, but so she would give me this nickel, and she would go tell me to go in the store and tell the clerk and say, she would always say, hold out your hand like this and say 5 bubble gum and put your coin on there. And so that's how I communicated with the guy at that store. So um, that was probably, I was about 5 or 6 then. So she could have easily went in there with me and did the transaction, but she wanted me to learn to communicate too with the store owner and to do things on my own. So that's why she would, have me do that little transaction on my own.
That's just cute though.
Yeah. And I always remembered they
So
would
just
put
as
it
your
in
time,
a little brown paper sack, those bubble gum, and then I
yeah,
would bring it out.
she had her little bag. Eh?
Yeah.
So just as your time like traveling around, being in different schools, just meeting new people, can you talk about like, possible instances of racism or, non-natives being interested in your culture or your language, but they didn't really go about it the right way, so it was kind of weird for you to interact with. Can you talk about some experiences with that?
Yeah, I will. So Hardin is like a border town, and that's where we did most of our grocery shopping. There was some cafes there, and it's kind of a small town that had that had some stuff. But I remember, again, as a little girl, my grandma liked to go eat at one of the cafes, and so we would go in, and they were nice to her. They would always say, Mrs. Real Bird, hello. If they somehow knew her name, some of them did. But I remember several times we're walking, and we would get to the door the same time as a white person, and my grandma would stop me. She would stop, and then she'd step back, and she would let those white people in first. And my grandma always held my hand, anywhere we went. So I always remembered that. And and so but I didn't think much about it in going to school there, because in elementary, I was in Crow School for till 6th grade, and then 7th grade, we had to go to Hardin. And I was kind of excited to go, but the older kids in my family all, had already gone to school there. And so I was a little bit familiar with that. I didn't really experience any kind of racism. If I did, maybe I just didn't understand it. And so, but once I left and I moved to Albuquerque, uh, I just saw a lot of Hispanic people there, and they were running businesses. They were in all these different kinds of, work environments. And I was just like in awe of them because I'm like, gosh, they're the same color as me, but they're really out there, and I'm like, gosh, we're not even like that in Montana. And so the first time I moved back here, and so in that time I was there in Albuquerque and in Phoenix, it was a total of about 15 years. So I learned to kind of stand up for myself. If I got to the door before a white person did, I went in. Not like my grandma used to do and hold me back and let them go. It's like, nope, I got here first and I'm going to go in first, was kind of my attitude. So I get to Hardin, Montana the first few months, and I go into this bank. And so you know how the banks are where you kind of line up and then the first available teller, the first person in line goes there. Well, anyway, we're standing in line. There was a few Crow people and some white people, and we're all standing in line. We know how this works. This woman comes in, she cuts in front of, stands there, and the first available teller, she goes and she cuts this person off. And actually, this person she cut off was a white person, and that person didn't say anything. And the rest of us, all kind of stood there. And I'm like, I waited for somebody to say anything, and they didn't. And so finally, I spoke up. I said, hey, I said, we were here first, whatever. And then that woman and the teller got all nervous. And then the teller closed her little window and walked out with that woman. And so that's kind of the first I ever experienced how Hardin treated us. But then again, like I said, there was other, non-native people in line too. So I was proud of myself for standing up, not just for myself, but for the other people in line, because that's just common courtesy. You just don't cut in line. So then the other time I experienced anything odd was there's this little store, bakery in Hardin, and they had really good pastries. And I always like to stop there and, grab one and get going. So my daughter and I walked in, and she was about 10. And we walk in, and there's seating on either side. So we're kind of walking down this aisle to get to the counter. And so as soon as we walked in, there was this group of white guys sitting, older white men sitting in this corner, about 7 or 8 of them, and they're busy talking. And as soon as we walked in, they all looked at us and they just stopped talking and they stared at us. And Jordan, my daughter, was walking ahead of me, and I brought her up not to, hold or step back or whatever. But that was the first time I noticed that she stopped and she looked at me, and I said, keep walking. And so she did, and I followed her, and we got to the counter, and I looked at those men, and then that lady kind of had this weird attitude too. And so my plan was just to get my pastries and go. I wasn't planning on staying there, but because of their weird attitude, I stayed in that little bakery and had my pastry. And so the thing is that I had been in there before, and if we were staying, they would always ask us if we're staying, and they put our pastry on a plate. That woman automatically put ours in a little bag. And so I took it and I went and sat down, and I sat facing those men, and I just took my time eating. And I know it was uncomfortable for my daughter, but that was the first time she ever experienced that, how people were in Hardin, Montana. And so one of her teachers, she said, was always talking about how good that place was. So I told her, I said, you go back and you tell Mr. So-and-so that this is what you experienced at that bakery. So do you see, those were the kind of things. So had this been years back when it was my grandmother, she probably, when I like the way my daughter looked at me, like, what are we going to do? My grandma probably would have walked out and we would have left. So, but I didn't. I just said, keep walking because, I wanted to eat that pastry. But after that, we kind of wouldn't stop in as often. So that was some of the ones I experienced that kind of stand out. And I'm sure there's some, but I think I've just either learned to ignore it or I just, I hope that I have such a presence that they can't really say or do anything. If they did, I probably would speak up. But usually I'm not rude about it. I'm not, get all. However, I just sort of handle it in a calm way.
Well, I know I personally would not want to make you upset, so you better stay out of your way. Um, no, yeah, that's definitely something I'm sure a lot of natives can just relate to. You're just hanging out and you're getting judged.
Yeah. Yep.
Trying to live your life. You're just here. No, thanks for sharing that though.
Oh, you're welcome.
So we have about 15-ish minutes left. Did you have any other words of advice or anything you would like to talk about specifically or stories, anything you'd like to share?
I guess, time management is the key to get to that success when you're in college and stick with your program. Don't take other odd classes that don't pertain to your major. I remember my cousin went to college and his dad was really upset because he took this class called History of Rock and Roll. And so I always laugh about that. And I think I remember telling my daughter, I said, now don't be taking classes like History of Rock and Roll when you go, things like that. So just these other, people's experiences that they share too. So anyhow, but yeah, like your time management, and then once you're in a classroom, that classroom management is important, and just sticking to
Definitely.
schedules and just and researching what kind of jobs are out there before you actually commit to a major, and do what
Definitely.
you like. Actually do what you like and don't let other people change your mind.
We do have one question from
Okay.
Christine. They are asking, do you still experience any discrimination today?
Well, as I said, if there is, I either ignore it or I don't see it. And I walk in these establishments in Hardin, and I kind of always, you know how that saying goes, walk in like you own the place. So I do. And I am not mean about it. I just walk in and just carry myself respectfully, and I just really don't experience too much of it, but I'm sure it's still out there.
Definitely, definitely. Does anyone else have any questions for Lark before we close up our time? Oh, and then earlier Autumn said, I love this. I truly feel as if I truly feel that is where I am at. I waited till I was 33 to start this journey. Thank you for reminding me that I'm doing this because I love it and I want to. And the schedule and agenda is a life giver. Oh,
I have a comment,
Ariana, oh, who said that?
Christine.
Yeah, go ahead.
Hi, my name is
Hi.
Christine. I'm attending a university within the Pacific Northwest. Um, I really appreciate what you're sharing. I'm in a dominant white state and university, and I really like the fact that you said that um stand tall and walk like you own everything.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if it wasn't for our ancestral, they probably would have been still in their wherever they came from, having more problems or don't even exist anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also I'm going to school to be an environmental science. And one of the things that I found was history says about European industrial production is that um, I have this idea that they used a lot of their natural resources of where they came from. So, and so a lot of things were shut down. They couldn't own anything because it was like a hierarchy monarch to where they were just they have to pay their dues. So the way I see it is they came from that and they didn't have it easy, but they're very fortunate when they come to Canada, South America, and North America. So um I really understand what you're talking about. Because I see that in my part. Like one of them was when I first started my study in science was more of biology and chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
And because you're a tribal person, they want to dictate that you should study American Indian study or some social science. So, and it's like that's not my forte. That's not my my cup of tea. So that
Yeah.
was something that I experienced, but I let him know. And just like you said, it's good to not be too shallow and just be a standoff. It's good to like say what you want. I mean, if you want vanilla ice cream, you ask for vanilla ice cream in a
Mm-hmm.
waffle cone or a sugar cone. So,
Yeah.
so yeah, thank you. Thank you
Oh,
for that.
you're welcome. And thank you for your sharing as well.
Mhm.
Yeah, thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions? I know we got another one. I might say this name wrong. Ariana asked, have you come across the lady and the teller since then from your bank story?
Uh, Not the one who cut everybody off, but the lady, the teller. I would used to go in there a lot, so she always. Sometimes she wouldn't wait on me, or if she did, she was extra nice. So kind of
Of
like this
course.
overdoing it, you know. So yeah.
Of course, typical A. And then we have
Mhm.
a message from Monica. Hi, Lark. My name is Monica. I'm from the Crow tribe too. Sadly, I do experience racism and completely relate to your story about Hardin. I grew up in Sierra Vista, Arizona. I was born on the Little Bighorn, Montana reservation. I am finishing finals today for my bachelor's degree in business administration. I am interested in earning my MBA. I loved your stories and thank you so much for sharing.
Oh, yeah, you're welcome. So I have a question for you, Monica. Who is your family? I know Old Elk, I know that name, but which ones?
They said that is my family, the Old Elk family. Daniel Old Elk was my grandfather. I also stood proud in the public despite the current racism I have experienced. Right now, I live in upstate New York. Oh, wow. And the racism is not that bad. I was rejected service while in Billings, Montana, which was a shock because I'm not used to that. And she said my grandmother was Carlene. My dad is Dominic Old Elk.
Oh, okay, yeah. I know Dominic and I know Dan. Yep. So yeah. Hey, cool. Nice to meet you.
Anywhere Lark goes, she knows someone. A.
Even on here, huh?
Monica said, my grandfather was in Robert Redford film. Nice to meet you too.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember that film. That was a good film. I used to watch it. And your grandfather Danny, um, he always likes to tease. And so I have this really funny story. Um, when I first moved back from Arizona, I would go into like Walmart or somewhere. Anyway, though, but anytime he saw me, he would kind of tease me a little bit, and so one time I walked into Walmart and he was in there, and then another time I walked in there, he was there again, and about the third time I went there, he was there again. So finally, before he could say anything to me, I said, "Oh," I said, "do you work here? That's good." And I just took off running before he could say anything back. So that's that good way of teasing each other, and it's always fun. Some people are always real cool to tease and laugh with. So he was one that was like that.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, oh, Christy Redbird asked, do you still make a curriculum for your language?
I do the preschool one. It was my recent one, and then because the school I had worked before didn't really have anything, so I just created my own, and it's not really out there. I just use it for myself, and there is this one called what is it? It's a consortium, Crow Language Consortium, but it's run by white people out of Indiana, and they've been doing work here, but the work they create, then we have to buy it. And so I don't use their stuff only for resources, because to me, and so their stuff I've looked at, and it's really a lot. It's almost like Western education only translated into the Crow language, and it's what they want you to learn. Do you see how schools are? Everything is, this is what we want you to learn. That's exactly what they're doing, but they're translating stuff into the Crow language. Me, I that's why I don't use theirs. Also, I'm the Crow Indian here, and I know what I want my Crow students to learn. And that's what I came up with, and that's what I teach. Because I'm the one who grew up here. I'm the one who knows, knew as a child what I was taught. And so I basically just kind of created my own. And language isn't just about language, it also goes hand in hand with culture, so you can't have one without the other. And so anytime I do any kind of cultural stuff, of course it's all language based. And I don't encourage, or I don't push reading or writing of my language at this point, because I didn't learn how to read and write before I learned how to speak Crow. I just heard it and just, did that. And so going back to my English learning, it was the same way. I learned different words and phrases, just like my grandma would tell me how to say things as I went into the store. That's how you learn language, not reading and writing. So what that consortium doing is they're focused on reading and writing, and I just don't do that. It's like we're just going to learn phrases, words, and do conversation. So yeah, that's how my curriculum is.
Plus, I feel like that makes a lot more sense because even for Lakota language, like things aren't written out the same way. Like people will use different spellings. So it's like, well,
Mhm.
what's the point of learning how to read and write it if no one's going to agree on how to do it? So
Yeah,
I agree. Just speak it, learn to
yeah.
speak it.
And one of the things about the official writing of it, not everybody knows the Crow alphabet. And so when they write something in the official writing or in official, then most people are going to try to read it using their English language skills. Then it alters the word and it gives them a different meaning. And so
Mm.
anytime I do any kind of writing, it's all phonetic writing. It's like I write it the way it sounds using our English language skills.
No, that's really great. Chrissy said, yes, listen and repeat. I make and create content for our language, and not that what I'm going to school for, but it's what calls to me. The consortium
Mhm.
Whoops. Doesn't do that though. Doesn't do
Yeah,
thought and philosophy. So
yep,
makes
exactly.
sense. Um,
And you know how I got started in this is a friend of mine, a non-Crow member, heard me talking, and then she said, "Do you teach this?" And I'm like, "No." "Do you teach young people?" And I'm like, "No." And I kind of had this really weird attitude at the time. It's like, "No." I said it, and she's like, "Well, why not?" And I'm like, "Well," I said, "if they don't know it, it's their fault." And she looked at me and she was like, and she said, "You should share it." She said, "You have that knowledge. You should share it with your people." And I was like, "Oh yeah, whatever." I didn't even think, at the moment. But then as time went on, I just like, you know what, she's right. And so that's when I started, getting on this thing about just, wanting to teach language and culture. And so that's what my master's degree is Native American Studies, language preservation. So that's what I did. And so I did a lot of, did surveys, I had a group of kids that, not actually kids, they were college students, but they were all younger than me. And I had this little beading group, and that's where I was able to teach the language a little bit. And so at the time, I really had this ambitious goal. I thought maybe, and these were all Crow students, so I thought that I would get this group together and unofficially kind of teach them, work with them, and by the end of the school year in May, that I would be able to converse fluently with them. Well, that was a very ambitious goal because I didn't at the time understand how difficult language is, do you see? And so then that was the realization that I said, man, that more work needs to go in this. Plus, some of these students didn't grow up speaking Crow. And so that was another thing that I learned. So I learned a lot doing my research.
no, that's great. Um, Thank you for sharing with us. We
Mhm.
have hit our hour mark, so I'm
Okay.
going to let you all get back to your Friday evenings. Thank you all for joining us here tonight. If you did not see already, but I did put the event evaluation in the chat, so please make sure you fill that out for your attendance for tonight. And thank you again to Lark for sharing some time with us.
Welcome. And I enjoyed it.
All right. See you guys. See you, Lark.
See you. Have a good evening.